I, over the years, have come to the conclusion that race is really a fiction in the sense that prior to the 1700s, and Carlos von Linnaeus, who was a biologist and a very famous one, applying the term race to human populations, the word race applied to foot races, camel races, chariot races, horse races, and the like. When Europeans began traveling the world and making contact with indigenous populations and civilizations and sending back reports, people like von Linnaeus were classifying people according to various physical characteristics. There was no problem with that in itself. That's what science does. But as various forms of slave trade began to emerge, excuse me, colonization of different countries were taking place and so forth, the subjugation of populations and oppression of peoples and so on, looking for cheap sources of labor and what have you, there was a tendency to use the term race or the idea of race to suggest that certain peoples in the world were less than human, or less human than, say, Europeans, as it were, because slavery was not new in the world. But the kind of slavery that happened in the transatlantic slave trade was particularly dehumanizing and so forth.
Years ago, as someone said, in the last century, the science of the day, eugenics, anthropology, sociology, and so forth, all supported the notion of the 4 races or 5 races of humanity. They also supported notions of phrenology. You know what that is? That's the so-called pseudoscience of all you gotta do is feel your head and see what kind of lumps you got in there on your head. And if you had certain kind of lumps, you were intelligent. And if you didn't have certain kind of lumps, you weren't intelligent. How are you doing out there? You feel your heads, huh? Well, I'm sorry, I don't know what kind of lumps you need to have.
What that resulted in is that different educational systems early on in North America in particular really told the history, talked about discoveries and findings and technology and development of science and philosophy and literature from a European-based perspective, and ignored other findings, other contributions made by Aboriginal people or indigenous people, people of African descent, and people of other descents that are non-European, that were important for the advancement of civilization in North America and development of the American culture such that it is, that is, say, North American culture. That distortion then creates elements or feelings of superiority in those whose history is told, an inferiority or a sense of inadequacy, or people feeling they are of no consequence in those populations, usually minority populations, whose history is not told, whose contributions are not acknowledged, and so on. So in short, we say that race, as we understand it today, is really a social construct, which simply means that we, human beings, have fabricated it. That doesn't mean that it has no reality. It has a reality because we give it a reality. We live within the context of it. We fight wars over it and all sorts of things. So it has a social reality. But in the nature of things, in the nature of the universe and what have you, the idea of race is irrelevant. There is only one race, and that's the human race. There's only one human color, for that matter, and that color has an infinite range.